My name is Isabel Hart. I'm 31 years old, and I live in Denver. 8 months ago, I sent out my wedding invitations printed on handmade paper, sealed with wax, addressed by hand to every relative I loved. The venue was booked, the hotel reserved, the menu finalized. It was supposed to be simple, intimate, and joyful. Then, 2 months ago, my younger sister Chloe announced she was getting married too on the very same day. She called it a coincidence, said it was destiny, and my parents agreed. Last night, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "Your sister's wedding is the family's priority. We can't come to yours." Just like that, not a call, not a question, just a decision made without me. I stared at the screen, felt that familiar tightness in my chest, and typed 2 words back. "That's fine." They thought I accepted it quietly. What they didn't know was that I already had a wedding they knew nothing about, in a place they had never seen, and with people who would soon show them what real family means. They had no idea what kind of wedding I was planning or who would actually show up. Have you ever watched your family choose someone else's happiness over yours? When I look back, I can trace everything to the quiet beginnings of favoritism that bloomed long before I even had the words to name it. In our house, Chloe's laughter was the sun, and everything else orbited around it. Every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation somehow ended up being about her. If she aced a dance recital, the house filled with balloons and champagne. If I won a science fair, I got a tired smile and a reminder not to stay up too late next time. I still remember my 8th birthday. I had asked for a small cake shaped like a star because I loved astronomy. But when the day came, the cake was pink, covered in ballet slippers. "Your sister already had the mold," Mom said, as if that explained everything. I blew out the candles quietly while Chloe twirled beside me, showing off the tutu she got for helping plan my party. It was always like that. The storyline of our family was written in Chloe's handwriting. Every Christmas morning, her gifts were wrapped in gold foil, lined up perfectly under the tree. Mine were fewer, simpler, practical. Socks, notebooks, a used paperback or two. When I got into the school orchestra, Dad congratulated Chloe for being such a great influence. And when she tripped during a performance, the whole family rushed to comfort her as if the world had ended. I sat in the audience, clapping softly, invisible. The older I got, the sharper those small moments became. At 15, I brought home my first report card full of A's, thinking maybe, just maybe, this would make them proud. Mom glanced at it, smiled faintly, and said, "You're lucky, sweetheart. Some kids have to work so hard. Chloe's just gifted that way." That word lucky burned more than any insult. It made my effort feel accidental, undeserved. Chloe, on the other hand, was born for greatness. She never had to prove anything. I learned early that love in our house came with conditions, and one of them was being Chloe. But the moment that never left me happened one quiet night when I was 16. I was cleaning out the living room drawers and found a thick family photo album. Page after page, I saw Chloe's milestones, her first dance class, her prom, her smiling face surrounded by family. I flipped further back and found one old picture. I remembered a family portrait from a summer trip to Yosemite. I remembered standing awkwardly next to Mom, hair windblown, eyes squinting from the sundae. But in the album, that photo looked different. The edge had been trimmed. My shoulder was there, but my face was gone. Someone had literally cut me out to make the frame neater, Mom explained when I asked. I didn't cry, but something inside me cracked quietly, like glass under pressure. It wasn't just about the photo, it was about being edited out of my own family. From that night on, I stopped expecting to be seen. I stopped waiting for applause, stopped hoping for fairness. I poured myself into books, machines, and anything that didn't require permission to exist. I would fix broken radios, rewire lamps, build little circuits just to see something light up because at least those things reacted. At least they noticed when I tried. Chloe, meanwhile, danced through teenage years like she was made of sunlight. She could do no wrong. If she came home past curfew, Dad laughed it off. At least she's social. If I did the same, I was lectured for an hour about responsibility. Looking back now, I realize our parents didn't just favor Chloe, they built their entire identity around her perfection. She was their mirror, their proof of success, the child who validated their efforts. I, on the other hand, was the background. The practical one. The convenient daughter. And convenience, I learned, is a fragile kind of love. It disappears the moment you become inconvenient. There's a photo I keep tucked away, one that still feels like a metaphor for everything that came after. It's from Thanksgiving when I was 17. The whole family sits around the dining table, everyone smiling, leaning toward each other. The turkey in the center, candles glowing. And at the edge, there's an empty chair beside Chloe. My chair. I remember I was the one taking the picture because Mom said, "You're good with cameras. Let's get one where everyone looks nice." They never took another shot with me in it. That image stayed in my head for years. A perfect family, one missing seat. Even now, when I think of that empty chair, I understand what it meant. It wasn't about that one dinner, it was about a pattern. I was the daughter they loved when it was easy, the daughter they remembered when there was room. And when life got crowded, when Chloe wanted more attention, when convenience dictated choices, I was quietly pushed aside. No shouting, no cruelty. Just omission. And sometimes omission hurts more than words ever could. College was the first time I truly breathed. I left Indiana with a single suitcase, a second-hand laptop, and a scholarship to study logistics and supply chain management at Stanford. I remember standing outside the dorms my first night, the air smelling faintly of eucalyptus, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and freedom. For once, there was no Chloe nearby to outshine me, no constant comparison hovering like a shadow. I thought maybe, if I worked hard enough, I could finally become someone worth being seen. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one at the campus library, another helping a professor catalog freight data just to afford meals and textbooks. Some nights I'd fall asleep at my desk, fingers still resting on the keyboard. It was exhausting, but it was mine. Every late shift, every cheap coffee felt like a small rebellion against the life I had left behind. By my senior year, while other students were applying to corporate internships, I was sketching out ideas for a startup. It began simply. Hospitals were losing millions due to broken delivery chains for medical equipment. What if there was a system that could track every shipment in real time and reroute supplies before shortages hit? I called it MedRoute, just a concept on paper at first. My classmates laughed at the idea that a 22-year-old without investors or family connections could build something like that. But I didn't need belief. I needed a challenge. The first 2 years were brutal. I lived out of a shared apartment in San Jose, eating instant noodles while negotiating contracts with suppliers over patchy Wi-Fi. I maxed out credit cards, borrowed from friends, and coded until my wrists ached. There were days when I thought about quitting, especially when our first pilot project collapsed, and I had to lay off half the small team I'd built. But quitting felt too much like repeating my old role. The girl who disappears quietly when things get inconvenient. I refused to vanish again. Then came the pandemic. Hospitals were desperate, supply lines fractured, and MedRoute's tiny system suddenly became essential. We could see, on a live dashboard, where PPE was needed, which trucks were delayed, how to redirect oxygen tanks before they ran out. In one chaotic spring, everything changed. Within months, 10 hospital systems signed on. Within a year, 50. Investors flooded in. I barely slept, but it was the kind of exhaustion that tasted like purpose. When Forbes listed me under 30, I didn't tell my parents right away. I wanted to hear their voices light up, to feel them proud. But when I finally called home, Mom only said, "That's nice, honey. Chloe's firm just moved her to Boston. Can you believe how fast she's climbing?" Dad chuckled in the background. "That tech stuff is too complicated for us, but we're glad you're keeping busy." Keeping busy. That was their phrase for everything they didn't care to understand. Still, I kept moving. At 29, I sold MedRoute for over $100 million. The number didn't even feel real when it hit my account. It just sat there cold, silent, like an unacknowledged triumph. I celebrated not with champagne or a yacht, but with a quiet dinner alone, a bowl of pasta and a glass of red wine. That night, I looked out over the city lights and realized I had built something out of the very thing that used to define me: invisibility. I had turned it into drive. But even success didn't rewrite the story back home. When I visited for Thanksgiving that year, the conversation at the table revolved around Chloe's engagement. She flashed her ring under the chandelier, and Mom sighed. She's marrying into such a lovely family. I tried to tell them I'd been invited to speak at a global logistics conference in Geneva. Dad waved a hand and said, "You travel too much, sweetheart. It's not healthy. You should settle down like your sister." Obsession. That was the night I learned silence could be more powerful than any defense. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just smiled and cut my turkey. Inside, something shifted. The quiet became my strategy. I didn't need to prove my worth through their validation anymore. I could prove it through creation, through action. My success would never fit into their narrow script, but it didn't need to. I began to build a new life outside their orbit. I bought a small apartment overlooking the Denver skyline, filled it with the scent of cedar candles and the hum of solitude. I invested in young female founders who reminded me of the girl I once was: scrappy, overlooked, determined. I visited art galleries alone, took pottery classes, even learned to cook from scratch. With every new skill, every quiet evening, I felt myself rewriting the definition of family. It wasn't about blood, it was about who believed in you when no one else did. Years later, when my fiancé proposed, it wasn't in some grand display. It was in the kitchen, flour on our hands from rolling pasta dough. He looked at me and said, "You don't need to prove anything anymore. You've already built everything you were searching for." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. I announced my wedding 8 months in advance, partly out of excitement, partly out of habit. I had always been the planner, the careful one who thought ahead, who made sure there was room for everyone. I wrote the invitations myself, each one sealed with gold wax and a pressed olive leaf tucked inside, a small symbol of peace and belonging. I mailed them by hand, one by one, feeling like maybe this time, everything would finally fall into place. When I stopped by my parents' house to deliver theirs, Mom smiled politely as she read it. 8 months away? You're really organized, she said, before adding, "Don't worry, sweetheart, of course we'll be there." Dad patted my shoulder, his eyes already drifting toward the television. Still, for a moment, I believed them. Over the next few months, I poured myself into every detail of the day. The location was simple: a vineyard in Colorado's western slope, not too far from Aspen, surrounded by golden hills and lavender fields. The kind of place that didn't need decoration because beauty was already in the air. I had chosen it precisely because I thought my parents would love it. They'd always wanted to visit that region, and I imagined them sitting under the twinkle lights, watching me walk down the aisle, smiling like they used to in old family photos. It felt like the right thing to do, the adult thing, the hopeful thing. Then, 3 months before the wedding, Chloe called. Her voice was bubbling with joy. "We found our dream venue," she said breathlessly. "Can you believe it? It's available on the exact same date as yours. It feels like destiny." For a second, I didn't even process it. I thought maybe she was joking. "Wait," I said slowly. "You mean the same weekend?" "No," she laughed. "The same day." "Isn't that wild?" "But it's fine. We're on the East Coast, so it won't clash for guests who can travel later in the year." Ender 7. I sat there on the couch, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the snow falling outside my window. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone. Light, unbothered, as if she had claimed a date that was free for the taking, as if I hadn't chosen it first. 2 days later, I got another call, this time from Mom. Her voice was careful, rehearsed. "Sweetheart, about the wedding dates. You know how Chloe is. She's very emotional right now. Her fiancé's family could only do that weekend, and, well, she's the baby. She really wants everyone there." I felt my throat tighten. "So, what are you saying?" Mom sighed softly, as though she were the one being wronged. "We just think it might be easier if you reschedule. You've always been so independent, and everyone's already planning to fly out east for Chloe's big day. It's just logistics." Logistics. The word landed like a knife, cruelly ironic, considering it was my career. They were asking me to move my entire wedding because it was logistically convenient for my sisters. For a long time, I said nothing. The silence stretched so long that Mom began to fill it with excuses. "You know how hard it is for your father to take time off. It's just one date. Chloe's already booked her band." I finally said, very quietly, "I told you my date first, Mom. You promised you'd be there." There was a pause, the kind of pause that carries a lifetime of hierarchy in it. Then she replied, "Sweetheart, Chloe's situation is different. Her fiancé's family has influence. It's not about choosing sides, it's just easier this way." And there it was again, the same sentence dressed in different clothes. "It's easier." That phrase had followed me since childhood, always justifying every small exclusion. It was easier to skip my award ceremony. Easier to forget my birthday when Chloe had a recital. Easier to pretend my achievements didn't exist because they didn't fit their story. That night, I called my father. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "Izzy, you know how your sister gets. If we don't go, she'll take it personally. You've always been the strong one. You can handle this." I wanted to laugh. Handle it, as if handling neglect was some kind of inherited skill. As if years of being overlooked made me responsible for their comfort. But instead, I said nothing. I just listened to his voice fade into the static, nodding as if I agreed, though he couldn't see me. When the call ended, I sat for a long time in the dark, the glow of my engagement ring catching the light from the window. A symbol of love, yes, but also a mirror of clarity. I realized I was waiting for something that would never come. My parents would always choose the path of least resistance, and that path had Chloe's name carved into it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't text anyone in anger. I simply opened my laptop and looked at my wedding guest list, 200 names, from family to friends to mentors. And as my eyes drifted over each one, a thought formed, quiet and steady. If they always choose Chloe, let them. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't compete. I would let everyone choose for themselves. In that moment, something inside me solidified, not bitterness, but resolve. I thought about every time I'd been edited out of photos, every empty chair that bore my absence, every time "it's easier" had been used as a shield for cruelty. And I decided that this time, I would no longer wait for a seat at their table. I would build my own and see who had the courage to sit with me. I bought the villa in Tuscany almost by accident, or, at least, that's how it felt at the time. It was a listing I had saved months before, back when I was just daydreaming about peace. But the night my parents told me to reschedule my own wedding, I opened that same page again. The screen glowed softly in the dark. Val d'Orcia, Siena, 42 acres. Olive groves, vineyard. Stone villa, restored. The photos looked like something from another lifetime. Gold light spilling across rolling hills, a red-tiled roof glowing at sunset, cypress trees tracing the road like guardians. I stared at the images for hours until one thought formed so clearly it felt like a pulse. If they won't come to my table, I'll build my own here. Within a week, I was on a plane to Italy. The villa sat at the edge of a small village named San Quirico, where time seemed to slow down. The air smelled of rosemary and warm earth. The old caretaker, Signor Rossi, handed me the keys with a proud smile and said in thickly accented English, "The house waits for someone who sees it." I didn't tell him how much that sentence felt like it was meant for me. When the heavy oak door creaked open, dust rose in thin beams of sunlight, swirling like memories waiting to settle. The floors were cool terracotta, the walls pale stone, each window framing a landscape too perfect to be real green valleys, a silver ribbon of a river, and far away, the faint bell of a church that rang exactly at noon. I walked through every room barefoot, touching the rough walls, the wooden beams, the cold brass handles that still carried the chill of centuries. Behind the villa stretched acres of olive trees, old, gnarled, patient. Their leaves shimmered in the wind like tiny mirrors catching secrets of the Sunday. I stood among them and thought, this is what endurance looks like. Not loud, not flashy, just steady. I had spent years trying to prove myself to people who only notice noise. Now I wanted stillness. The purchase went through in silence. No social media posts, no announcement. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reclamation. The villa wasn't about status or revenge. It was the first place that felt like mine. When I signed the final document, I realized how symbolic it was, my name alone on the deed, no family signatures, no approval required. Over the following weeks, I began to restore it. I hired local craftsmen who treated the house like a living thing. Each morning, the scent of lime plaster and sawdust filled the air, blending with lavender from the fields. We replaced cracked roof tiles, polished the chestnut doors, rewired the lights. I designed the courtyard myself, a long stone table under a canopy of vines, hung with small golden lanterns that would glow like fireflies after dark. I pictured people sitting there, laughing, sharing food and stories, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That image became the blueprint for everything. The villa would host a wedding, not the grand spectacle my family had envisioned for Chloe, but something smaller, truer. No choreographed dances, no gilded invitations, just sincerity. It won't be a performance, I wrote in my notebook, it will be a promise. I called my fiancé and told him my idea. Italy? He repeated, half laughing, half in awe. Are you sure? I've never been more sure, I said. If this wedding is going to mean something, it has to be ours, not theirs. He paused, then said softly, then let's do it. Let's make it real. As preparations began, I spent my mornings walking through the olive groves. The leaves whispered when the wind passed, the sound like gentle applause from the earth itself. I started to notice how life here moved differently. The locals didn't rush. They believed good things took time, bread rising, wine aging, trust growing. Every sunset felt like forgiveness, each dawn like a second chance. In the evenings, I would sit on the terrace overlooking the valley, sketching ideas for the wedding layout. The long table would stretch from the courtyard to the first row of olive trees, wrapped in white linen, decorated with candles and simple wildflowers. I wanted the day to feel like an embrace, not a show. I imagined laughter echoing through the hills, music soft enough that you could still hear the wind through the branches. There would be no hierarchy, no family tables set apart. Everyone would sit together, friends, cousins, grandparents, because love shouldn't have categories. Sometimes, when the builders had gone home and the sky turned from gold to violet, I would walk alone through the villa, touching the cool stone walls and feeling the history hum beneath my fingertips. I thought about how much of my life had been spent chasing approval that never came, trying to earn a love that was always rationed. Here, there was no need. The villa accepted me without conditions. It didn't ask me to be easier or quieter or more like Chloe. It simply stood, ancient and open, as if saying, you belong here. One evening, as the first lights flickered across the valley, I poured a glass of Chianti and sat at the long table that had just been finished. The wood was warm from the day's Sunday. I set a single plate, a candle, and a sprig of olive branch beside it. It wasn't a dinner, it was a declaration. I whispered to the empty chairs. This is where the story changes. Somewhere deep inside, the hurt of being forgotten began to loosen. For the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely, it felt sacred. The olive trees swayed gently, and their shadows moved like a slow dance across the courtyard. I could almost hear their voices, steady, timeless, reminding me that peace doesn't come from being chosen, it comes from choosing yourself. That night, before going inside, I looked back one last time at the glowing villa and thought, let them have their grand ballroom, their staged perfection. I didn't need chandeliers or applause. I had light from the sky, warmth from the earth, and enough courage to build something of my own. The next morning, I would begin sending invitations again, this time, to the people who truly mattered. The ones who had always seen me, even when my own family didn't. The wedding wouldn't be about proving anything. It would be about becoming whole. The first person I called was Rachel, my cousin. She was the one who always texted me on birthdays, even when my parents forgot. The one who once slipped me $20 at a family barbecue and whispered, "Don't tell anyone. I know how they treat you." Her number was still saved under the nickname Ray the Honest One. When she answered, her voice carried the familiar warmth of someone who never pretended. "Hey, Izzy, what's up?" I hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Ray, I just wanted to let you know my wedding's still happening, same date, just not in Colorado." She paused. "Not in Colorado? Wait, did something happen?" I laughed lightly, though my throat tightened. Chloe decided to have hers the same day. Mom and Dad said they can't make it to mine. The silence on the other end stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Rachel exhaled sharply. "You're kidding me, they really after everything?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "They said it's easier this way." Another pause, but this time, it wasn't shock. It was weariness. "You know what?" Rachel said finally. "We're tired of watching you be treated like you don't matter. You don't have to ask me twice. Send me the location. We'll be there." Her voice cracked on that last word, we. It wasn't pity, it was solidarity. I told her about the villa in Tuscany, the olive groves, the courtyard with the long table under the vines. "It's small," I said. "Not fancy like Chloe's, but it's honest." Rachel laughed softly. "That's exactly what we need. Send the details, I'll tell Aunt Marianne." By the next morning, Aunt Marianne called me herself. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied into something firm. "Isabel, I heard what happened. Your mother told everyone Chloe's wedding would be the family event. But I think we've all attended enough of their events, don't you?" I didn't know what to say. She continued. "Your wedding, it sounds peaceful, like something real. Your uncle and I talked last night. We're done pretending, we'll be in Tuscany." I closed my eyes and let the words sink in. The phrase kept repeating in my head like music. "We'll be in Tuscany." One by one, I reached out to the others. Eli, my cousin from Chicago, who used to sneak me extra slices of cake when we were kids. When I told him, he let out a low whistle. "So, they finally did it, huh? Picked Chloe over you again." "Yeah," I said. He chuckled, not out of amusement, but out of disbelief. "You know what? I'm not surprised, but I'm not playing their game this time. Text me the address, Izzy. I've been dying for an excuse to leave the country anyway." Next was Uncle Ray, the quiet one who never said much but always showed up early to help set up chairs or fix broken lights at family gatherings. He listened without interrupting. Then he said simply, "They've forgotten what family means." "You haven't. Tell me what day to fly out." The hardest call was Grandma Helen. She was the matriarch, the one who had always tried to keep peace even when the family fractured. I wasn't sure how she would react. When she picked up, her voice was frail but clear. "My Isabel," she said softly. "Your mother told me I shouldn't travel so far at my age. But I've been alive long enough to know that distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in who shows up when it matters." Tears welled in my eyes before I could speak. "Grandma, you don't have to." "Oh, I'm coming," she interrupted gently. "And I'll bring my best dress. The one I wore to your mother's wedding. I think it's time it sees something beautiful again." When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table of the villa, the sun slanting through the window, lighting up the glass of wine I hadn't touched. I realized my hands were shaking not from sadness, but from something lighter, something like awe. What started as a quiet rebellion was turning into something far greater. Within 2 days, Rachel had created a group chat for their relatives. At first, it was called Wedding Plans, but after Grandma sent a message that said, "This is the first time our family is gathering for love, not obligation," Eli renamed it the Real Family Table. The name stuck. Every morning, new messages poured in. Photos of passport renewals, screenshots of booked flights, links to Tuscan Airbnb cottages near the villa. Aunt Marianne shared a picture of her old sun hat and captioned it, "Haven't worn this since '98. Tuscany, here we come." Rachel sent a video of her kids practicing Italian phrases, giggling through every mispronounced Gracie. Even Uncle Ray, the quiet one, texted a simple thumbs-up emoji, his way of saying everything he couldn't in words. No one mentioned my parents. No one mentioned Chloe. It was as if the entire family had silently agreed to rewrite the story. One evening, as I sat on the villa terrace scrolling through the chat, I saw Grandma's latest message appear. For years, I've watched Isabel being left out, but this time, I think we're all tired of attending a show. We want to attend something real. Within minutes, heart emojis filled the screen. That night, I opened my laptop and looked at the RSVP list. At first, it had been nearly empty. Now, the column beside each name glowed green. Yes, 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 yes. Rachel and her family. Eli and his partner. Aunt Marianne and Uncle Ray. Grandma Helen. Even distant cousins from Oregon and Toronto had written, "Count us in." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the olive trees swaying gently outside. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. What I felt was something pure, like truth unfolding slowly, at its own pace, the way dawn spills across the hills. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The kind that doesn't need to shout. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to fight to belong. I didn't have to prove anything. The people who saw me really saw me were already finding their way here. I didn't chase them. I didn't beg. I simply built a table, and they chose to sit down. As the sun dipped behind the Tuscan hills, painting the villa walls in gold, I whispered into the quiet, "It's not about who didn't come, it's about who did." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The days leading up to the wedding felt like something out of a dream, soft, golden, unhurried. Tuscany in early September glowed like a painting, and every sunrise seemed to whisper that I had made the right choice. The villa, once a quiet refuge of stone and silence, was now alive with motion and laughter. Workers moved through the courtyard, hanging garlands of ivy and grape leaves across the trellis. A long wooden table stretched beneath the vines, its surface polished smooth and warm in the sunlight. When I ran my hand along it, I thought of all the years I had been given no seat at the table and how this one was finally mine to build. The air was filled with small, beautiful sounds, scissors snipping stems, chairs scraping softly against the flagstone, the faint hum of a guitar being tuned by a local musician. Signora Lucia, the chef from the nearby village of Pienza, arrived every morning at dawn with a basket of ingredients fresh from the market. She had silver hair tied in a low bun and eyes that carried the calm of someone who had spent her whole life feeding people from the heart. The first morning she stepped into my kitchen, she looked around, touched the marble counter, and said in her lilting Italian English, "This place, it is alive again." Allù. Together, we planned a 6-course menu that felt like a love letter to Tuscany: handmade peachy pasta with truffle butter, bistecca alla fiorentina grilled over olive wood, roasted vegetables with rosemary and sea salt, and for dessert, Lucia's own family recipe of tiramisu layered with espresso and marsala wine. When I told her I didn't want the dinner to feel extravagant, she nodded firmly. "No performance," she said, wagging a finger. "Only sincerity. Food should hug, not impress." I'm great. The table setting reflected the same spirit. I chose no gold cutlery, no glittering crystals, just cream-colored linen, clay plates handmade by a local artisan, and simple glass bottles filled with olive branches and blush roses. Each napkin was tied with a piece of raffia and a sprig of lavender, releasing its fragrance the moment it was lifted. When the sun began to dip, we would light the hanging lanterns strung along the trellis, hundreds of them glowing like captured fireflies. For the gifts, I wanted something that wasn't decorative, but meaningful. So I worked with a small olive press in the village to produce bottles of cold-pressed olive oil from the very trees behind the villa. Each bottle bore a label printed in soft gold. For showing up, it wasn't just a thank you gift, it was a message. A quiet acknowledgement that presence itself was love. Late one night, I sat by the kitchen table, surrounded by small cards and envelopes. On each one, I wrote by hand. "You're not just invited, you're seen." My handwriting wasn't perfect, but maybe that was the point. It was human. I wanted each guest to hold something that felt like a heartbeat, a piece of truth they could take home. As the week went on, the villa transformed. The courtyard smelled of fresh herbs and rain-soaked stone. Florists from Montepulciano arrived with buckets of pale pink and cream roses. They worked in silence, weaving the blooms into arches and garlands while Italian folk music played softly from a portable speaker. When they finished, they left behind not just flowers but a sense of reverence, as if they understood this wasn't just a wedding. It was healing made visible. One afternoon, I stood at the edge of the vineyard while the workers tested the music system. A violinist played a few notes, the sound floating gently over the hills, blending with the buzz of bees and the rustle of olive leaves. The sunlight poured across the land in thick golden waves, and the grapes glistened like small jewels on their vines. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, the air didn't taste like tension. It tasted like peace. Inside, Lucia and her assistants were already preparing for the rehearsal dinner. The smell of garlic and butter drifted through the open windows, mingling with the laughter of the staff. I walked past the kitchen and heard Lucia giving instructions in a tone that was both stern and loving. "Slowly, slowly," she said to one of the young cooks. "The secret is patience, like love." Do. Outside, the carpenters were setting up the final touches, a small wooden platform for the musicians, a makeshift bar with local wines, and an arched entryway draped in olive branches and white cloth. When I asked them how it was going, one of them smiled and said, "Every wedding we build is beautiful, but this one feels honest." That night, when the sky turned indigo and the crickets began to sing, I wandered alone through the courtyard. The lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, scattering amber light across the stone walls. The long table stood ready, waiting. I imagined the laughter that would soon fill the air, the sound of Rachel's kids chasing each other through the vineyard, the low murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses under the stars. I could almost hear Grandma Helen's voice, soft and steady, saying, "See, this is what family should have always been." I walked to the far end of the table and sat down, resting my palms against the cool wood. It struck me how far I had come from the girl edited out of family photos to the woman who had built her own place of belonging. The olive trees whispered in the wind, their leaves shimmering like quiet applause. Lucia stepped out from the kitchen then, her apron dusted with flour. "Everything is ready for tomorrow," she said, wiping her hands. "You should rest." I nodded but didn't move. "Lucia," I asked softly, "why do people always gather around food?" She smiled, eyes crinkling. "Because food tells the truth. It says, 'I want you here.'" When she went back inside, I stayed a while longer, watching the lanterns sway. Tomorrow, these empty seats would be filled with people who chose me not out of obligation, but out of love. And that was the quiet miracle of it all. I didn't need revenge, or validation, or anyone's apology. I only needed this: the sound of wind in the olive trees, the scent of rosemary in the air, and the promise of belonging I had built with my own hands. As I finally stood to leave, the horizon glowed faintly gold. The villa looked almost alive in the moonlight, its windows like watchful eyes, its walls warm with the memory of everything it had seen. I touched the door frame before stepping inside, whispering, "Tomorrow, we begin again." Axer O. And somewhere in the stillness of the night, it felt like the land itself whispered back, "Welcome home." The morning of both weddings arrived, two different worlds unfolding under the same Sunday. In Boston, the air was thick with humidity and nerves. Chloe's ceremony was held in a grand hotel ballroom draped in silk and crystal. But as guests began to file in, the air felt strangely hollow. The rows of chairs near the front sat half empty, the chatter subdued. The wedding planner fidgeted with her clipboard, whispering into her earpiece, "Are we missing a bus?" But there was no bus. There was just absence, quiet, undeniable, spreading through the room like fog. At the entrance, Mom stood in a pale lavender dress, her smile brittle. She kept checking her phone between polite greetings, pretending not to notice how many familiar faces weren't arriving. "Maybe flights got delayed," she murmured to Dad, who adjusted his tie and nodded stiffly. But the truth pressed against them like a shadow. No one was coming. Inside, Chloe fanned herself nervously, her makeup already beginning to smudge. "Where's Aunt Marianne? And Grandma?" she whispered to her maid of honor. The woman only shrugged, glancing toward the door. The photographer was circling the room, adjusting his angles, quietly avoiding the empty rows. "Maybe we can move everyone forward," he suggested gently, "to make the photos fuller." Chloe forced a laugh, but her voice cracked. Across the Atlantic, in Tuscany, the same sun spilled gold over the olive fields. The villa shimmered like it had been painted by the light itself. The courtyard hummed softly, not with chatter, but with warmth. Rachel's children were chasing each other between the vines, their laughter mingling with the sound of Eli's guitar tuning under the trellis. Grandma Helen sat in the front row, her hand curled around a small olive branch she had plucked that morning, the symbol of peace and endurance. Isabel stood by her bedroom window, watching the hills turn honey-colored. The breeze lifted the white curtains as she slipped into her gown, simple silk, soft and unadorned, glowing faintly in the sunlight. Lucia had insisted on pinning a small sprig of olive leaves in her hair, saying, "Per la fortuna," for good fortune. Isabel smiled, her reflection calm, grounded. There was no stage, no performance, only truth waiting to unfold. Back in Boston, the ceremony began. Chloe walked down the aisle, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Her eyes darted across the room, so many missing faces, so many chairs draped in white but untouched. Whispers began to ripple among the guests. "Where's the rest of the family? Didn't her cousins used to come to everything? Strange, not even Grandma?" Mom's smile froze tighter. Dad clapped politely when the officiant mentioned family unity, but his eyes flickered toward the back of the room, where two entire tables remained empty. The air felt heavy, rehearsed, suffocating, a show being performed for no one. Meanwhile, in Tuscany, the scene unfolded like a breath released. Guests were already seated beneath the grapevines, the long wooden table lined with wildflowers and candles. The hills rolled endlessly beyond, the light soft and forgiving. Eli strummed the opening chords of a gentle melody as Isabel stepped out from the villa's stone archway, the train of her gown whispering against the courtyard stones. When she appeared, everyone rose instinctively. Grandma stood, holding her olive branch aloft, tears glinting in her eyes. Rachel clasped her hands to her chest, whispering, "She did it." Even the staff paused for a heartbeat, watching her cross the courtyard as the golden light poured over her shoulders. There was no orchestra, no choreographed walk. Just the hum of guitar strings, the rustle of the vines, and the soft sigh of the Italian wind. The officiant, a local friend of Lucia's, spoke in slow, melodic English, his accent rich and warm. "Today," he said, "is not about what was absent, but about what has arrived. Love is not measured by how many are invited but by who shows up." Isabel looked around the table, at every face glowing in the dusk, faces that had once turned away from gatherings filled with favoritism, faces that had chosen her now. She began her vows not from paper, but from memory, her voice steady and low. "To those who show up," she said, pausing as a breeze passed through the olive trees, "this love is for you. For the ones who came even when it wasn't easy. For the ones who believed I was enough before I proved it. For the ones who stayed." Rachel wiped her eyes. Eli played a soft chord in the background, the notes trembling in the golden air. Grandma nodded slowly, whispering, "That's my girl." Back in Boston, Chloe repeated her own vows, her voice faltering halfway through. The room felt smaller now, the silence louder. Someone sneezed, someone else coughed. When the officiant asked, "Is there anyone who objects?" The pause that followed was long enough for everyone to feel how empty the air had become. The photographer took rapid shots, cropping out the blank chairs, his finger twitching as though trying to erase the truth. Afterward, during the reception, Mom forced laughter as she greeted acquaintances. "Oh, Isabel. She's having something small out of state. You know how she is private." Dad poured himself a second drink before the first was done. Chloe sat stiffly beside her new husband, trying not to notice the vacant tables, the murmurs, the way people's smiles didn't reach their eyes. And then, as the night deepened, phones began to buzz. One after another. A cousin Eli, of course, had posted photos from Tuscany. The images spread like wildfire through the family group chats and social media. Isabel under the grapevines, smiling beside her husband as Rachel's children tossed rose petals into the air. Grandma Helen holding the olive branch high as everyone clapped. The long wooden table glowing under lanterns, surrounded by faces full of laughter and life. In one photo, the entire family stood together, arms linked, cheeks shining in candlelight, the Tuscan sky painted violet behind them. At the center was Isabel, serene, radiant, unforced. When the photos reached Boston, the ballroom seemed to freeze. Guests began murmuring, turning their phones toward each other. "Wait, isn't that the family? They're all in Italy?" Isabel's wedding looks incredible. At the head table, Chloe's hand stopped midair, her glass trembling. Mom leaned over, squinting at the screen one of her friends was showing her. The blood drained from her face. Dad's forced smile vanished, replaced by stunned silence. No one spoke for a long time. Then someone muttered, almost under their breath. They couldn't breathe. The photographer, sensing the tension, hesitated before snapping another picture. Chloe looked directly into the lens, her eyes glistening, her lips tight. It was the kind of photograph no one frames, but everyone remembers. And far away, in Tuscany, Isabel raised her glass under the stars and said softly, "To showing up and to the family we choose." The guests cheered. Laughter echoed through the valley. And for the first time in her life, Isabel wasn't waiting to be seen. She was living in the light of being truly chosen. The morning after the wedding, the Tuscan sun rose slow and golden over the valley, brushing the villa walls with light like a gentle promise. The air still carried the sweetness of last night's laughter, faint echoes of music, clinking glasses, and the hum of voices that had felt like home. The long wooden table was now scattered with petals and empty wine glasses, traces of joy left behind. I sat on the terrace with a cup of coffee, watching the olive trees shimmer in the wind. My dress hung by the window, still faintly scented with lavender and wood smoke. For once, my mind wasn't racing to the next thing. It was still, whole. And in that stillness, my phone began to buzz. It was Mom. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. But something inside me whispered, "Answer not for them, but for closure." I swiped the screen, holding it to my ear. Her voice came sharp, tense, already breaking. "Isabel, how could you do this to us? Do you have any idea how embarrassed we were yesterday? Everyone at Chloe's wedding was talking about your little event in Italy. You made us look like fools in front of our own family." I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the sunlight crawl across the table. "I didn't do anything, Mom," I said quietly. "I just had my wedding. The people who wanted to come, came." "You split the family in half," she snapped. "Do you understand what that looked like?" We were humiliated. Even Pastor Green asked where your grandmother was. Can you imagine? How could you put us in that position? I let her words hang in the air. They didn't sting anymore, they just sounded tired. "I didn't split the family," I replied calmly. "I simply stopped standing where I wasn't welcome." Everyone chose where they wanted to be, where they felt seen. There was a beat of silence, then the sound of her voice tightening with frustration. "You think you're the victim in all this? You made us look heartless, Isabel. Do you have any idea what people are saying about us?" Before I could answer, another voice cut in, firm, low, and unmistakable. "Judy." Mom froze. It was Grandma Helen. I smiled faintly and turned on the speakerphone. "Hi, Grandma." "Hello, my dear," she said, her tone soft before hardening as she turned her attention back to my mother. "Judy, maybe now you finally see what happens when you forget who your family really is." "Mother, please," Mom started, her voice trembling. "No," Grandma interrupted. "I've watched you and Robert push this girl aside her entire life. Every holiday, every celebration, it's always been Chloe this, Chloe that. Do you remember the year you gave her the gold bracelet and told Isabel she was too old for gifts? Do you remember the graduation you missed because Chloe had a hair appointment? I do. And now you're angry that people finally saw the truth you've been hiding for decades." Dad's voice appeared faintly in the background, trying to sound reasonable. "Mother, that's not fair. We didn't forget Isabel. We just chose the easier wedding to attend. Boston was closer. We thought it made sense." Grandma's voice sharpened like a blade. "No, Robert, you didn't choose what made sense. You chose comfort over conscience. You went where you wouldn't have to face the consequences of your own favoritism. And the rest of us? We went where love actually lived." The line went dead silent. I could almost hear their breath on the other end, caught between guilt and disbelief. Finally, Mom spoke again, her tone softer but still defensive. "You make it sound so simple, Mother. You don't know what it's like to manage both daughters, to make everyone happy." "I don't need to know," Grandma said, her voice steady. "Because love isn't management, Judy. It's showing up." And last night, for the first time in years, I saw what family looks like: laughter, music, joy, not perfection, not appearances. Just truth. No one spoke after that. The silence was almost heavy, but cleansing. I looked out at the horizon, at the olive trees swaying under the morning light, and said quietly, "Grandma's right. I didn't do this to make anyone look bad. I just stopped chasing a place where I wasn't invited." Dad cleared his throat. "You're still our daughter, Isabel. We didn't mean for it to turn into this. But it always does," I said gently. "You didn't have to choose sides, you just had to show up." Another silence, longer this time. I could picture them sitting in their kitchen back in Indiana, the walls lined with photos where I was always in the corner, always slightly out of frame. Finally, Mom sighed, the sound small and thin. "You hurt us, Isabel." "No," I said softly. "I just stopped letting you hurt me." The quiet that followed was the kind that ends things. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with truth that can't be undone. Grandma's voice broke the silence one last time, low but firm. "I think that's enough, Judy. Let her be. She's earned her peace." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Grandma." Mom murmured something I couldn't quite hear, a half-formed apology that dissolved before it reached the air. Then the call ended. I stared at the phone for a moment before placing it face down on the table. The valley stretched out before me, the sky wide and endless. The same sky that had hung over every year of being overlooked, now filled only with light. Lucia came out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, smiling softly. It's more than okay. She tilted her head, curious. You look different today. I finally stopped begging for a seat, I said, my voice calm, and built my own instead. Lucia smiled knowingly, glancing toward the long table still set from the night before, olive leaves scattered, candles half melted, sunlight catching on empty glasses. Then, you'll never eat alone again, she said. I laughed, quiet and free. The air was warm on my face, and somewhere in the olive grove, a bird began to sing. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval, apology, or permission. I had found my own table and the people who chose to sit at it. The week after the wedding unfolded like the gentle afterglow of a long, golden sunset. Tuscany had gone quiet again, the guests had flown home, the musicians had packed their guitars, and the lanterns under the vines had been taken down. Yet, even in the stillness, the villa still breathed warmth. The scent of olive oil and roses lingered in the air, and laughter seemed to echo faintly in the stone walls, as if the joy of that night refused to fade. That morning, I woke to dozens of notifications from the family group chat, the real family table. Rachel had uploaded a series of photos. The long wooden table bathed in the honey light of sunset, Grandma Helen holding her olive branch with that soft, knowing smile, the children playing tag under the trees while Lucia served trays of pasta steaming in the dusk. The images carried more than memory, they radiated peace, a kind of quiet redemption that everyone seemed to feel. Under the first photo, Eli had written, "You gave us the family we always wanted." Oh, then Aunt Marianne added, "For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like we were pretending to be happy." A few cousins chimed in after, their messages bubbling with laughter and warmth. "Next year, Tuscany again," one wrote, followed by a flood of heart emojis and olive branch icons. Someone changed the group's header photo to the image of us all at the table, heads tilted toward one another, eyes glowing in candlelight. No one posed, no one performed. It was imperfect, blurry, and utterly real. As I scrolled, a feeling washed over me, not pride, not triumph, but something softer. I realized that what I had built wasn't just a wedding, it was a homecoming. Later that afternoon, as the light turned mellow, I sat on the terrace with a cup of tea and watched the valleys stretch endlessly below. My phone buzzed again, this time, a notification from social media. Chloe had posted her wedding photos. The images were technically perfect, crisp lighting, expensive decor, a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers. But the comments were sparse, the likes fewer than I would have expected. Her caption read, "The happiest day of my life surrounded by love." Yet the photo told another story. Behind the smile, there was a stiffness, an emptiness in the crowd. The comment section was quiet for hours until one of her friends finally wrote, "Beautiful Chloe," followed by a lone heart emoji. I stared at the photo for a while, not out of malice, but out of reflection. The girl who once would have felt vindicated by this silence was gone. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a deep, calm understanding. I typed a short comment under her post. I hope it was beautiful. And I meant it. There was no need to compete anymore. No scoreboard, no secret satisfaction. The story had already rewritten itself, and not through vengeance, but through truth. That evening, Rachel called. Her voice crackled with warmth over the line. "I still can't believe it, Izzy," she said. "Do you realize what you did? You gave us a reason to come together again." Even Uncle Ray said it was the first time he saw Grandma laugh that freely in years. I smiled, tracing the edge of my cup. It wasn't me, it was everyone who decided to show up. Rachel chuckled. "Still, you started it, you built the table." I looked out over the olive trees swaying gently in the breeze. "Maybe," I said. "But it doesn't belong to me anymore, it belongs to all of us." As the sun dipped below the hills, a new message appeared in the group chat. It was from Grandma. "The world keeps chasing grand weddings and perfect pictures. But what happened in Tuscany wasn't about perfection, it was about people remembering how to love." Beneath her message, the replies came fast. Eli. Couldn't have said it better. Rachel. Count us in for next year. En Marianne. Sam villa, Sam table, Same love. A blank. I scrolled through the thread, smiling quietly to myself. It was as if something broken for generations had been mended, not loudly, not ceremoniously, but with small, steady stitches of truth. A few hours later, I received a text from an unknown number. Chloe. I saw the pictures. Tuscany looked nice. I hesitated for a moment, then replied simply. Me. It was peaceful. I hope you're happy. 3 dots blinked for a long time, then vanished. No response followed. And, somehow, that was enough. I leaned back against the chair, letting the night air wrap around me. The villa lights glowed softly through the windows, casting gentle halos across the courtyard. I could still hear faint laughter from the memories that had taken root here, the kind that would linger long after everyone had gone home. Healing, I realized, doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly in shared meals, in unspoken forgiveness, in a single olive branch passed across a table. I took one of the leftover gift bottles, the olive oil labeled for showing up, and placed it on the shelf above the fireplace. It caught the light from the lanterns outside, gleaming gold. I thought of how many years I had spent waiting for someone to hand me approval, to finally say, "You did enough." But I no longer needed that sentence. The next morning, when I opened the group chat, there was one final message from Grandma, sent just before dawn. Maybe next Christmas, we gather again, not because of obligation, but because love is reason enough. I stared at it for a long time, my chest warm with something wordless. It was no longer about winning or proving anything. The truth had already done its quiet work. What remained was belonging and the peace that comes when you finally stop fighting for recognition and start living in gratitude. I looked out over the endless rows of olive trees, their silver leaves catching the light, and whispered, "Yes, Grandma, next year, again." And in that moment, I understood this wasn't revenge anymore. It was renewal. A week after the last guest had flown home, Tuscany settled back into its quiet rhythm, the hum of cicadas, the whisper of olive leaves, the smell of warm earth after a light rain. The laughter that had filled the villa was now memory, but it lingered gently, like the echo of a beautiful song that didn't quite want to end. That evening, I lit a few candles in the courtyard, no music, no decorations, just soft light, a simple meal, and 3 empty plates set across from mine. When I had sent the message inviting my parents and Chloe, I hadn't expected a reply. But to my surprise, that morning, Mom texted, "We'll come." The words were short, cautious but real. Now, as the sun sank over the hills, I saw their car winding up the gravel road. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something heavier, the weight of years unspoken. When they stepped out, the air felt fragile, as if the whole valley was holding its breath. Dad gave a small, uncertain nod. Mom looked around the courtyard, her eyes flickering over the olive trees, the lanterns, the table. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. Chloe stood behind them, dressed simply, no trace of the practiced glamour she once carried. Her eyes met mine, unsure, but not hostile. "Come in," I said softly. "Dinner's ready." We sat down at the long wooden table. I poured the wine Chianti, deep red like the sunset fading behind us. The silence stretched at first, filled only by the sound of cutlery and the faint rustle of wind through the vines. The candlelight danced across their faces, familiar, aged, and yet somehow new. Finally, I spoke. My voice came steady, almost gentle. "I didn't do this to humiliate you," I said. "I just needed to know who would show up for me." Mom's eyes glistened instantly. She set down her fork, her voice trembling. "Isabel," she whispered, we were wrong. We thought we were doing what was right for the family, what made things easier. But the truth is, we just didn't want to face how much we'd hurt you." Her hands shook as she reached for her glass. "You've always been the strong one. We told ourselves you didn't need us, that you'd be fine no matter what." But watching that video from Tuscany, seeing Grandma, the cousins, everyone together, I realized something. You were never strong because you wanted to be. You were strong because we left you no choice. The words broke something open inside me, not anger, not vindication, just an ache that had been waiting for years to exhale. Dad cleared his throat, his voice low. Your mother's right, we failed to see you, Izzy. Every time you achieved something, we brushed it aside because we didn't understand it. And when Chloe announced her wedding, we thought you'd understand again. He sighed, eyes heavy. But understanding isn't the same as love. For a long moment, no one spoke. The candles burned lower. I could hear the faint chirp of crickets rising from the vineyard. Then Chloe finally looked up. Her voice was barely a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I just wanted to be seen too. You always seemed so composed, so untouchable, and I thought if I had the bigger wedding, maybe for once everyone would look at me. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't think they'd choose you over me. I didn't think they'd leave. I reached across the table, my fingers brushing the olive branch centerpiece. They didn't choose against you, Chloe, I said quietly. They chose love. The kind that doesn't need a stage. She looked down, nodding slowly, her tears falling soundlessly onto the tablecloth. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no wall between us, just truth, laid bare and trembling, like light breaking through old cracks. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The meal became a quiet communion, the clink of glasses, the soft scrape of forks, the air shifting from tension to tenderness. The wine softened everything it touched. When Mom finally reached across and took my hand, she didn't say I'm sorry, she just held on. And that, somehow, was enough. After dessert, as the candles flickered lower, I stood and walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table. From the basket beside it, I took a small olive green ribbon, the same one I had tied around the guests' gift bottles, and wrapped it around the chair's backrest. The fabric shimmered softly in the candlelight. Mom watched, her eyes questioning. What's that for? I smiled faintly. For the girl who once waited to be chosen. Oh. For a moment, no one moved. Then Grandma's words from the call a week earlier echoed in my mind. Love isn't management, it's showing up. I looked at my family, the mother who had finally learned to listen, the father who had put down his pride, the sister who had found the courage to admit her fear, and felt something gentle settle in my chest. Forgiveness wasn't grand or loud. It didn't need to be declared. It simply arrived when the fighting stopped. When they left later that night, the air had grown cool and still. Chloe hugged me before getting in the car, her arms tentative but real. Mom lingered at the door, tears glistening in her eyes. Can we come back sometime? She asked softly. Of course, I said. There's always a seat. When the taillights disappeared down the hill, I returned to the courtyard. The candles had almost burned out, their last flames small and steady. I sat beside the empty chair, tracing the olive ribbon with my fingers. Above me, the stars shimmered like scattered salt, and the scent of the olive trees drifted through the air. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, you don't need to fight for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own and let the right people find their way to it. The night answered in silence, soft and infinite. The ribbon swayed gently in the breeze, not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of peace. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the girl left out of the picture. I was the one holding the frame.